This is a Soviet spy camera. So is this. And this. These are the Kiev Vegas. Tiny sub-miniature cameras built by the Soviet Union in the 1960s, right in the peak of the Cold War. So the Kiev Vega started off its life as a consumer type camera. Anyone could buy it. It's actually based off a Japanese camera called the Minolta 16. A lot of cameras that the Soviet Union built were inspired, let's say, by Western and Japanese cameras. You can watch my video about the Zorky 4K for more info about that. But what I do find quite funny is that it's such a close copy of the Minolta that in the earlier Kievs, like this one, you can actually interchange the parts between the two cameras. But anyway, it came out later that the KGB actually did use this camera. There's not actually a lot of information about it for obvious reasons, but there are some sketches and photos of how this camera would have been used, and as you can see, it would have been hidden in things like cigarette packs with a secret shutter button integrated in, so you could take covert images of, I don't know, secret documents, let's say. Because this camera is so small, you can't really use 120 film or 35mm film. You have to use something much smaller than that. And the choices you've got are either 8mm or 16mm film. This camera particularly uses 16mm film, like the Minolta, hence the name, the Minolta 16. And buying 16mm film like this is actually quite a nightmare. Most of it has to come from motion picture film because 16mm film was rarely made for stills. And for some reason in the UK, it's just such a nightmare to find. I looked ages trying to find some that wasn't expired and that you could still use, and it was actually my girlfriend Natalie ended up finding some from across the pond over in America from the people at the Film Photography Project, so a big shout out to them for actually selling this stuff. Now this film is actually labelled for the Minolta 16, but as I said, because these cameras are so similar, obviously it will work in my Kiev. Now after weeks of waiting, I finally received my package from America, and turns out it's Kodak ektachrome slide film. I never thought the first time I'd be using ektachrome would be in a camera like this, but whatever. Now, if you don't really take pictures on film, you don't know the difference between negative and positive. Most people would shoot what's called negatives, which when developed come out as negatives, which is probably what you're used to seeing. Obviously, positive film comes out as a positive image, so the colors are straight in what you'd call the negative, I suppose. So films like Kodachrome, ektachrome were what we call slide films, and they were sort of designed, hence the name, to be put in a projector as slides, or you could see it directly on a light table, and often they got much richer, nicer colors and much finer grain, and they tend to be a bit more expensive and quite more complex to produce, so most people stick to color negative. So using slide film added an extra step, and it actually turned out to be a bit complicated when it came to developing this film, but we'll get to that in a minute. So a bit about this camera. It uses a zone focusing system. Basically, when you look through the viewfinder, you're looking through a bit of glass, that's it. There's nothing to help you frame your image or focus. You just have to guess the distance, and a bit of an issue with parallax on this image. If you look where the viewfinder is compared to where the shutter is, you can see there's quite a bit of a distance. So taking close-up images really isn't great, but to be honest, I wouldn't take close-ups or portraits with this camera anyway, so that wasn't really a big issue for me. Cocking the shutter on this camera is definitely one of the cooler things I've ever seen. It's like loading a gun. It's absolutely insane. The film comes with a little plastic cartridge where you load your film, which is pretty cool. I had all the original ones, which have got a sort of light sealing foam in them. That's the only light seal you're going to get on this camera, and to be honest, I didn't really trust it that much. Other than that, on the side of this camera, there are some things like aperture and focusing, which I'll get onto later on in the video, but that's pretty much it. There's really not a lot to say. The shutter is this little button here, and it makes the goofiest sound ever. Perfect for street photography, if I may say. But yeah, that's pretty much it when it comes to these cameras. So, loading this camera. Probably the most stressful and awful time I've ever had in my 22 years of being on this planet. No joke, loading this camera is probably the worst thing ever. I wouldn't wish it on my worst enemies. Basically, there's no information online on how to do it. The Film Photography Project YouTube channel has a sort of guide on loading the Minolta 16, but as helpful as it is, it's still extremely complicated. So basically you need a darkroom changing bag because the film that you get comes in a spool. It doesn't come in a canister or anything, it's just a bit of film, so you can't obviously change it in the light, so you need either a darkroom or a darkroom changing bag. Then you also need a ruler, some sticky tape, some scissors, and a bunch of accessories. You put it all in the bag, you have to cut the film to roughly around 40 centimeters. That should, in theory, give you around 30 images. And then you have to attach a tiny bit of tape on one end and tape it to the take-up spool, and then the other end roll it really tightly, fit it in a tiny little crack. I mean, I won't bore you with all the details. It took me, no joke, at least an hour to get the first one in. I was so stressed, so angry, and like an idiot, I decided to do this all the evening before our flight. One of the dumbest decisions I've ever done in my life. Anyway, I managed to actually load the camera after an hour, and to be honest, I wasn't sure if it was going to work whatsoever because all these images depend on that tiny bit of tape sticking to the take-up spool. The amount of times it came undone in my bag and I had to redo it, I really didn't think it was going to last 2 weeks going through planes, airports, trains, traveling all over the place. I just thought it was going to come undone, but I took the risk and went for it. I actually managed to load 2 of these cameras and I brought 2 with me, but one of them, the shutter kept getting stuck and I only managed to take a few pictures. So I never got that one developed. So I'm going to be sticking with this camera right here for this video. So as I mentioned, this is a Soviet camera used by the KGB for espionage. I thought the best place we could use it for me would be Berlin, the sort of capital of Cold War history here in Western Europe. And I decided to bring it with me on the little ship that Natalie and I were going to. So Berlin, especially East Berlin, is just full of relics from the Cold War, and I just thought it'd be quite fun if I could take pictures of these on this little camera. But a few issues came up. First of all, as I mentioned, I didn't really have a lot of information about this camera and I was just so excited to use it. I didn't actually bother to look at all the little features on the camera, and I didn't realize that mine had aperture and focusing on it. So a lot of these pictures turned out to be out of focus. I ended up bringing quite a lot of cameras on this trip. I had my Canon A1. I was working with a company called Catch Cameras, taking pictures for them as well. As you've seen my video on Berlin that came out a few weeks ago, you'll know what I mean. So I didn't actually often have as much time to use this camera as much as I did. And as I said, one of the cameras didn't work. So I think, stupidly, a lot of my favorite shots were on the other camera, which does not have a chance to get developed yet. I don't honestly think any of the pictures took on that one in particular, but let's have a look at the first frame. Okay, let's get rid of the elephant in the room and admit that these pictures look absolutely terrible, but there's a few reasons for that, and let's break it down. So when I went to get these pictures developed, I just dropped the whole camera off at the lab, explained that it was slide film and that it's 16mm film and that I couldn't open the camera, at least not in the dark room. So I gave them the camera, explained it, and they said, fine. I wasn't actually too sure also how you could scan film like this. Scanning 16mm film is not something that most labs offer, but I didn't think about that at the time. I just dropped the camera off and see if there was any pictures, at least on the positives. And a few days later, I got a phone call from my local lab explaining that they couldn't actually develop the film in E6 chemicals just because of the type of film and a few issues they had on their side, but they could offer doing it via C41, which is what you use for color negative film, which is what most people would shoot. Now the problem with this is that they're 2 different processes and 2 different types of chemicals. So when you develop the film in color negative, if it's slide film, it's not really going to work properly. There's going to be color shifts, issues with the grain, and that is the main thing that you're seeing in this image. This film was not built to be developed in the chemicals that it was, which is why it's all green, yellow, the grain's quite thick, nothing really looks right. But there's something else in these images, this weird foggy yellow look. I believe that these are from light leaks. This camera, as I said, is over 60 years old, and to be honest, the only thing that's stopping light coming in is this flap here, which is not very solid, if I'm being honest. I was surprised that these images took at all. I don't really see any light seals or anything, so a bit of fogging really was expected, and this is actually minimal. I thought it was going to be a lot worse than that. And to be honest, I think the film looks expired as well. Some of the color shifts, I don't know, it looks expired. I've never shot positive slide film before, so I've never seen expired slide film. Let me know if you think this looks expired. For me, the film looks expired. But anyway, all that to say, I think the film had light leaks. I think obviously it was processed in different chemicals and it was expired. All that led to images like this. And it was also scanned, I should mention, on a flatbed scanner. Just because it's 16mm film, it was quite hard to scan in something like a Frontier. But anyway, enough of that. Let's go through the images. There's about 2 or 3 that are actually in focus. Here's one of Natalie walking down, which I actually quite like. This one of the TV tower as well is pretty cool. I think my favorite image is definitely this one. Now, I know I've been sounding very negative, but at the end of the day, they actually worked. This old 1960s KGB camera worked, and I managed to take some pictures. I think I've also got to remember that the point of this camera wasn't to make ultra sharp pictures. It was a very cheap, user-friendly camera that people could fit in their pocket, and it was also used for espionage. It wasn't meant to take really high-resolution pictures. It's definitely more of a gimmick, and the fact that it took pictures at all is pretty amazing. The negatives are also very funny. The spacing is really strange on them, and there's this weird image that's very funnily shaped. I don't know what happened there. I think I ended up getting around 18 to 19 images in total. And to be honest, I wasn't expecting any images to have taken. So to come back to Edinburgh and be able to, a few days later, see these, I found quite amazing. And I'm almost quite happy that they look like this. For me, if I used this camera and I got really sharp images, I would have been like, oh, okay, cool. But the fact that it's an old KGB camera and that it did take these sort of grainy images, for me that's just the point of a camera like this. Using a camera that was used in the Cold War, for me, it's meant to be grainy, it's meant to be low res. That's the whole point. If I were to do this again, I would probably use black and white film, try and find some C41 film maybe, and load it in a darkroom, not in a darkroom changing bag. It was just so stressful, ended up getting so hot and sweaty trying to change that film. Awful. And I'd probably tape up where the light seals are meant to be, just because I think light leaks did damage a lot of these pictures. But yeah, there you go. There are some pictures taken on a KGB Soviet camera. Definitely one of the funniest cameras I've had to use. Probably the most complicated, even though it's meant to be one of the simplest cameras anyone could use. I think it's just a technology that doesn't exist anymore, and the tools just aren't there anymore, to be honest. But it was definitely an experience for sure. Horrible one most of the time, but I don't think I'll be using this camera anytime soon, to be completely honest. Have you ever used a camera like this, or the Minolta 16? I want to know, is the Japanese counterpart a lot easier to use? Is it better built? Is it more user-friendly? Is it easier to load the film? Please let me know. I'll be very interested. But yeah, I hope you've enjoyed this video. If you did, make sure you leave a like, subscribe and comment, and I will see you as usual next week for a new video.